Yaranga is a small town on the Queensland northern coast that was briefly a major tourist spot in the late 70s and early 80s, due to the popularity of Wattle's Waterworld theme park and the pristine local beaches.
In 1989, on a day that became locally known as Grey Thursday, the fish began to die. First hundreds, then thousands, all washing up on the beaches and covered in a grey, viscous goo, since linked to the local mining industry pollution.
With its lifeblood of tourism, fishing, and mining either dead or dying, Yaranga began to choke, and only the seemingly bottomless coffers of Mrs. Wattle herself kept the town from being abandoned.
She lives there still, in what can only be called a hauntingly decrepit luxury houseboat, permanently docked behind the water world itself. A rocking, creaking wreck, nevertheless lit up almost nightly with the luminous din of her apparently healthy social life.
The only hope Yaranga has for a better future comes in the form of Barry Holt, the local mayor who believes he can get outside investment to revitalise the community, though his efforts are opposed by Wattle and many of the older residents of the town.
3 weeks ago, a grey, sticky, and completely featureless body washed up on the once popular Spilt Milk Beach, the one off Spilt Milk Cove. Last week, the same thing happened, except with 2 bodies. And this morning, news came that a group of surfers found 4 of these pale and grotesque forms already rotting on those same sands.
We welcome you to the pilot episode of Mythtakes Happen, a world-building podcast where 2 good friends create fictional settings for you to game in, live in, and explore. Episode 0 hosts a self-contained cosmic horror setting. You might hear us call the podcast a different name during the first few episodes, but I assure you, this is a mere hallucination.
Look in the episode description for follow-up materials summarising the setting, providing alternative takes on our efforts, as well as helpful GM and player tips for you to incorporate into your games. Trigger warnings, if any, will also live here.
I'm Chris, an educator in the great Australian state of Victoria.
And I'm Aaron, a professional game master in the physically larger Australian state of South Australia.
The structure of the podcast today will begin with fable fodder, where each host has developed aspects of the fictional town of Yaranga without the interference or knowledge of the other hosts. We're coming into this blind, and we will see how well our ideas smash together.
After this, we will take a short break, imperceptible to you, the listener, through the magic of technology, and weave together connections in World War words, linking our 2 halves together and perhaps altering some fundamental aspect of one another's contributions.
Before we begin, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of this great land. I am recording on the land of the Kulin Nation, home to the Boonwurrung people.
And I'm recording this on the land of the indigenous Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains.
And with that, we'll get started.
Hi everyone, get set for ready, setting, go.
So this is our session 0, the purpose of which is to be a sort of proof of concept for this podcast.
A practice at doing our sections, see if it flows, see if our ideas float.
Yes, essentially we're going to try to do a mini episode, not with a sort of grand setting that is developed over 12 episodes, as we have said about...
It's something self-contained.
Something self-contained, that's right. Yeah.
Well then, we'll go with our normal process of fable fodder, followed by World War words, and then finish on up. We'll take turns for the moment, have a little bit of a chat during fable fodder, a little bit of back and forth, but we're experimenting with that this time.
It is a grand experiment, and we're going to see whether it actually works or what changes we need to make along the way.
And if you're hearing any of this, it means we thought it was worth, posting somewhere.
Let's talk about fable fodder, okay? So We're going to engage this one. We talk a little bit about things like, potentially, the geography, the history, the context, landmarks, notable residents, problems that this place might have.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go first?
I would be honoured, privileged even.
Amazing.
Okay.
Let's do it. This is the idea generation stage.
Exactly. All right.
Hey, it's time for fable fodder.
Big Bluff. On the west side of Yaranga, between the town and Spilt Milk Cove, is a mid-sized rise of earth that ends in a sandstone cliff at the water's edge. The slope is covered in a dense bushland of short, twisted eucalypts, pierced by an old road that winds its way up to a bold dirt top. By the side of the road, At irregular intervals are small clearings which have been used by the local teens, and occasionally adults, for private and frequently intimate meetings. But Big Bluff, with 2 Gs, which, as I mentioned, is unimpressive in its size, is not named for that size, but for a person, or rather an event involving a person. That's why the 2 Gs. Did you want to hear about Mr. Big?
Oh, I would love to hear about it.
Right. William Big was a renowned cad, rake, and cheat in the first decades of Yaranga's existence. He's even mentioned in the town's first broadsheet. And after nearly 20 years of being this less than charming self, something occurred during a card game one evening at the pub, and he was seized by several individuals there that night, and they dragged him to the top of the bluff, and they tossed him over in the middle of the night, and his body was never recovered, but the bluff got a name that day.
Oh, that's interesting. That's very interesting, because I actually went with a similar thing in my park. There's also a natural feature that is named after someone who died.
Hey, it's a apparently it's going to be a town culture thing.
This is synergy. It's working already.
Synergy, possibly emphasis on the sin. I'll guess a little bit more. So, Big Bluff has, as I said, long been this place where teens go for privacy and distance from parental control.
Do you mean heavy petting?
Yes, and potentially more. Let's say it's a number of those teens were probably conceived in the self-same place they're fooling around.
Disgusting. I love it.
Lovely. Of course, equally disgusting but slightly more worrying is the fact that every generation, someone between the ages of 12 and 17 becomes distracted and withdrawn, usually enough so their friends and family notice, and then they disappear. Always from Big Bluff. That's their last known location. Now, everybody knows that kids go missing from the bluff, but only a few have noticed the pattern, and even fewer know why.
Oh, that is very fascinating. This also plays into something that I have ideas for. So that's really great. I think so far the puzzle pieces are coming together. So when we talk about them and put them into sort of cohesive picture, I think it's going to work quite well together.
Excellent. Oh, this is exciting. Well, now I want to tell you about Hendrik Pieterzoon.
Pieterzoon.
Pieterzoon. Pieterzoon, because it's one of the most fun last names I've ever seen.
Yeah. It reminds me of the Zune, the Microsoft Zune, which was actually a very good MP3 player. Buy Zune, kids.
Yeah, I would be interested, frankly. So, Hendrik Pieterzoon is the owner and operator of Top End Souvenirs, a small shop just off the waterfront full of cheap mementos, mostly stuffed koalas, tacky magnets, that sort of thing. Authentic Australiana, but made in China and Taiwan. Now, Hendrik is a proud member of the Yaranga Business Council. Despite this, and having lived in town for nearly 16 years, he's still considered an outsider. Probably his strange accent that's not really Dutch, even though he says it is. Maybe it's his odd way of always reaching out to touch you when he talks, but never actually quite making contact. He appears to be a mid-sized, egg-shaped man with virtually no hair at all. He has this overly friendly and loud demeanour, and this amazing way of never really answering questions about himself. He gives the impression that he would be harmlessly foreign wherever he went in the world. He dresses primarily in bright pastels, with stripes and zigzags on nearly everything. It is instead the Sin Seller. The Sin Seller. Also called the Shard Sharer, the Venal Vendor, and the First Merchant of Vice.
Fascinating.
Although, if you do call him any of those things, he tends to pout really sort of unprettily. Within several items at the Top End Souvenirs, Hendrik has secreted in them a sliver of its own bone. An unhealthy charcoal grey shard that, when removed from the shop, contaminates those who touch it, admire it, and the place it resides with an aura of low-grade evil, like a meanness, a pettiness. It brings forth these small evils of the human soul, the ones born from frustration, resentment, and dissatisfaction.
Well, that's great, except for the people who fall victim to this. It's great for me.
Now, importantly, it has to sell the item with the bone shard in it. It's absolutely vital that the Sin Seller sells in the same way that humans have to breathe. Anyone who steals a contaminated item is actually completely immune from its curse.
Interesting.
But they are hunted by the First Merchant of Vice.
Okay. Is it because he's put some vital part of himself into that?
And he needs to spread that curse for its existence.
Sorry, I keep calling him he. He's an it.
Well, we can go he and it. I mean, I use he at the beginning and it towards the end. Now, the Hippocrast. The Sin Seller has another function or task. It is the keeper of the Hippocrast. The Hippocrast is a waist-high ceramic urn in the shape of a Greek amphora, except its mouth is much wider. It's painted, also in the manner of ancient Greece, with a series of scenes of people whispering to one another and being whispered to. It's obviously old, and an expert in antiquities, after some testing, would confirm the item is genuine archaeological miracle and has seen at least 2 millennia. The sin seller, Hendrik, will never actually sell this. In fact, cannot. Probably a better term. Those who risk spying on the venal vendor in the quiet times of night might witness him washing the Hippocrast with scented oils or crooning wordless songs of deep and disturbing affection, embracing it and cradling it like a child.
Very creepy. I like it.
Well, the thing is, the Hippocrast also has a power, and those that strike a bargain with Hendrik can use it to discover any secret at all.
That is a very powerful artifact.
It is, but as you'll find out, it has a cost. If you want to use it, the pointed bottom of the Hippocrast must be planted into grave soil.
Grave soil specifically, okay.
Technically, it has to be the grave of a liar, but given human nature, no grave has been found unsuitable so far.
Okay.
Now, once you've got it planted in place, the Hippocrast is then filled with water right to the brim. Local water. You can't just use bottled water. Now, once from there, there's no real ceremony, although if you piss off the sin seller, he has been known to tell you otherwise and sell you expensive incense, candles and robes, etc. But the only thing you really need to use the Hippocrast is a partner, someone who you truly care about.
All right.
Now, that other person, the partner, to the right of the Hippocrast, they hold the handles of the standing amphora while the user plunges their whole head into it. The user holds foremost in their mind the secret they wish to learn as they stay submerged for 39 heartbeats. While they do this, the water overflows, and as it washes over the painted figures of the side, they animate, and they turn to face the partner that's holding the Hippocrast, and in chorus, they will reveal to them the secret that the user least wishes them to know. And some users of the Hippocrast have insisted that the secret told to the partner wasn't true until the Hippocrast said it was.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good twist. I can imagine in a sort of a gameable context that would be very good. Very good thing to sort of like to reveal, to learn about it.
But I think we've had enough of weird, creepy shit, so we're going to return to something a bit more normal with the Yaranga Football Club.
The YRFC.
One of the hearts of Yaranga town culture is the Yaranga Football Club. That's Aussie rules football for our international audience. It consists of an oval of mud and grass with goalposts older than anyone in Yaranga. It has a building for a locker room that is marinated in the smell of sweat, rust and damp shoes. Last fitted out in the early 70s, the metal lockers are mostly held together by generations of stickers and nude pictures taped to every surface in layers. The last building is the clubhouse, ostensibly there to provide food and drink to the players and a place to hold trophies. There are precious few of that latter.
So they're not very good. They're not very good at the Australian rules football.
Well, the Yaranga team rarely finishes the season in the top half of the local district teams and hasn't won their division since 1956. So in reality, the Yaranga clubhouse is the domain of die-hard football fans and men who peaked in high school. While there's no actual prohibition on women playing for the team or entering the clubhouse, they are made deeply unwelcome whenever it's tried. So the clubhouse remains a bastion of beer, past glories, loud laughter, classic rock, and rampant misogyny.
Wow, that's incredible. So just a cool room for manly men to be sweaty together.
2 rooms. There's the locker room for the sweatiness and the clubhouse for the drinking and...
Oh, yes, that's right, yeah. I've never been... I don't play sport. I don't even know what shape a ball is, so...
Ball-shaped, obviously. That's why they call it a ball. I mean, to do anything otherwise would just be strange, surely.
The Australian rules football is not a bowl. It's an egg.
It is a leather egg. You might be wondering, why invent something like the Yaranga Football Clubhouse for something like this? Well, I've got 2 reasons. First, the clubhouse has been around for nearly a century, and the tales told by the old folks have been passed down from generation to generation. Some of the only people who know of the strange timing of the disappearances around Big Bluff, they spend half their time in the clubhouse.
So it's sort of like it's a hub of information as well.
Yes, and ancient town lore.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, this would be a good place to explore again in a role-playing game, perhaps, where you need to discover some facts if you are an outsider in the town.
Exactly. Although you would struggle if you were not male presenting.
True.
Now, there is a second reason. Every man jack in the Yaranga Football Club hates the Yaranga Business Council. and every bastard on it, because Mrs. Wattle paid for the last refit of the club and the oval, but ran headlong into the ingrained sexism of the club, and then withdraw all support from it, and then use her influence so that in the town, there's basically no business supporters of the club anymore, and so the club is slowly dying, starved of funds.
Which is a sort of nice connection to the town also slowly dying.
Well, it's to me, it's if you make enemies on the business council, like perhaps Mrs. Wattle, then maybe these could be allies for you, as objectionable as they be.
Oh, that's right, yeah. The enemy of my enemy and all that.
Precisely.
Perhaps even a woman could gain their trust.
Oh, that would be an uphill battle.
Sexism is alive and well in our small towns.
It's more alive and well, whereas in the big
It's
town...
more alive and well, yeah. Just on behalf of all men, I just want to say I am so sorry.
I would like to also add my apologies for the individuals with Y chromosomes.
Yep, or any other letters.
True. I have one final section.
Okay.
It is called The Accursed Prayer Slides of Wattle's Waterworld.
Okay, this I love, because I did not do anything with Wattle's Waterworld in my notes at all.
Well, there we go. That's right. So we've got something here. So one of the secrets of Wattle's Waterworld are the accursed prayer slides. All 13 of the theme park's excellent slides are complicated three-dimensional figures, and each one corresponds to a series of sigils in an ancient and forbidden language. A series of sigils that recites a prayer.
Ooh.
Technically, there is a 14th slide into the kiddie pool, but even genius inspired by ancient gods that laugh in the face of Euclidean geometry can't do much with a couple of meters of gently sloped plastic.
Okay, interesting. I like this idea of the shapes. Yeah, that's great.
So their purpose is deceptively simple. The process of a soul traversing the slide, and thus the sigil, is precisely the same as if it is being read. And it also takes a fraction of that person's essence as they unwittingly worship as they slip and slide in bewildering spirals. Now this evokes a delirious sensation of sensual delight that can and has been addictive, which goes to no small way of explaining Wattle's Waterworld theme park's financial success despite its abysmal safety record. Whatever malign purpose they were built for, and given the events of Grey Thursday in 1989, perhaps they've already succeeded, the prayer slides still have their effect. In fact, of late, they seem to be more pleasing than they have been in decades, causing the park to draw a small number of regulars that grow greyer and greyer with each visit, as whatever it is that's taken from them cannot be replenished, cannot be healed, as they slip and slide their way into soulless husks.
Fascinating.
Now, questions are, what happens if the park regains its popularity? What happens when enough people worship at these watery altars? And will the events of Grey Thursday replay? Or would something worse happen?
Ooh, that is an interesting question. I really like those. Those are some really good elements. I was making notes while you were speaking for World War Words, actually, and you have definitely provided quite a lot of good material here. I really like that. Thank you, Aaron.
Chris's bit stand-in.
Okay, so I envision Yaranga as this town that's built very close to this Spilt Milk Cove. The name for this kind of sheltered bay, which consists mostly of like very tall, sheer cliffs, and a beach that was once considered very, very beautiful before the events of Grey Thursday. And it's kind of, it's not as beautiful now. It's a little bit sticky. There are these white rocky outcroppings that you can see that kind of protrude from the sea at low tide. This supposedly gave the waters a kind of strange, otherworldly alabaster kind of glow when, for the first time in about 1889, missionaries first walked to the edge of these cliffs and looked across the bay. This is why they called it Spilt Milk Cove, because it reminded them of spilt milk. There are loads of beaches around the cove, but Spilt Milk Beach was the loveliest before the disaster of Grey Thursday. And the sand there is still very, very soft, very nice, but there is a smell to everything that, no one really has the, I suppose, resources or willpower to get rid of.
Any idea what the smell is of? Like sour milk or something?
Yeah, I think it's just something unpleasant. Like, sometimes if you go abroad and you go into some countries where they do have more issues with waste management. Sometimes go down these streets which have amazing food, but at the same time they kind of smell like all the stuff that you would normally like throw out and would not really affect us here. It just all smells like, rotten eggs and garbage.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of smell. Because the idea comes from, it's a lot of the stuff is from the mining industry runoff.
Right.
I'm not super familiar with how mining works, except that it's bad.
Cool. So something more mineral then.
Yeah, I think so.
Perhaps
And whatever happened back then, it's still affecting the town now. There are two very interesting features on Spilt Milk Beach. One is called the Dankworth Hole. This is kind of a hole. It lies to the west of the beach itself. It's quite close to a path that leads down to the beach from the cliffs. So, as you might imagine, it's a hole. It's partially in the bottom of a cliff, but it leads straight down for quite a long distance. And there are signs that tell you outside that you should not go in there because the caves get flooded every high tide. So this was a big problem at the height of Yaranga's popularity when tourists and their kids, they sort of vacationed there at the nearby campgrounds. Sometimes kids would go exploring and they'd get in some trouble and some would die, unfortunately.
Part of that poor safety record of the orangutan.
Absolutely. Specifically in 1972, 1978, and then for the last time, as far as anyone knows, in 1984, the Dankworth Hole actually took the lives of over-curious children and teenagers who defied those signs and went exploring anyway. The hole was known as Spilt Milk Cave until 1972, when a teenage girl and her boyfriend drowned there. They were also doing some heavy petting and then some heavy drowning, unfortunately. So the girl's name was Melanie Dankworth, and there was sort of a short-lived media circus around this event, and it influenced changing the name, although technically it's now called the Melanie Dankworth Memorial Cave Complex. People just call it the Dankworth Hole.
Yeah, no one can bother to say that whole title in conversation.
That's absolutely, true. So the second interesting feature is locally called the Tower. It's this 12-meter tall rock, basically. If you think about things like, the 12 Apostles in the Great Ocean Road, it's one of those, but it's like this kind of thin rock. It protrudes from the sea. It's made from that same type of white stone as the other rocky outcroppings. It appeared almost overnight in 1922-23 after a small underwater earthquake which shook the town but caused no damage. It's a sort of jagged and almost serrated looking structure, and from some angles it sort of looks like a castle tower. From other angles it kind of looks like a bony kind of barbed finger, but people just call it the tower. So these two features are very important, and this leads me down to the Cthulhu-esque part of this, which is the Dankworth Hole, of course, is where all the rituals take place. Yaranga is home to only about 600 people. I looked up populations of very small towns, and I thought 600 seems like a good number.
Yeah.
But it also hosts no fewer than 3 cults, and each worship a different aspect of the tower. So these 3 cults are all made up of local residents. I sort of wrote up a little bit, few notes about each of the cults. So the cults are called the Prophets of the Tower,
right,
the Temple Unwavering, and the Grofthouse of Murvock. The Prophets of the Tower, their belief system is that they believe that this edifice, the tower, is actually a cosmic egg containing the second child of God. Specifically, the Christian God. This cult is steeped in like deep Christian mysticism.
Right. And
they believe that they're kind of helping usher in a new age, essentially the second coming of Jesus Christ. But in their particular theology, the child born to that tower is literally God, who's stepping down from heaven to take care of the evils of the world.
There's plenty of those in Yaranga, so...
There's plenty of those. I sort of envision these guys specifically as being kind of well-meaning, and I suppose any questionable stuff that happens is not necessarily... They're not necessarily there to hurt people, and they're not necessarily there to make trouble, but they want to make the world a better place. It's sometimes that is at odds with the steps they have to take.
Mm-hmm.
The second cult I called the Temple Unwavering. And this is a little similar. It believes that the tower itself is the final part of a great map that's actually written across our wide country of Australia. They've mapped a majority of these supposedly natural monuments in Australia, including Uluru, the limestone pillars of the Pinnacles Desert, 12 Apostles, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they foretell that once they can work out where this incredible map is pointing them to, that they can open up the ninefold gate and exit the physical universe of pain and sorrow, becoming beings of pure light, sort of ascending. Like, if you ever see Star Trek and they have non-corporeal aliens there, that's what this cult, the Temple Unwavering, that's what they think will happen.
That sort of makes sense with Australia being sort of a built-in underworld you have to struggle through as you read the map.
That's true. And this is one, the third one is a bit of a silly one. I don't know, let's see. These guys are called the Groftowls of Murvock. So the Groftowls of Murvock are actually a group of cannibals who believe that consuming the flesh of the young will wipe away their earthly sins, including consuming the flesh of the young. They see the tower, which they call the Prev of Hawkow, as the protruding tooth of their giant god, the deity that they believe in, which is this colossal being that's made up entirely of like sewn together bodies. His name, or its name, is Zregtan Hawkow Kurgunt.
Right.
They have their own language. It is confusing and inconsistent. It is very difficult for them to communicate with each other because each member actually learns this language a slightly different way during their initiation ceremony, where they are starved for days and then released somewhere in the bush, where they have a vision of their deity who teaches them to speak the sacred language.
Right.
That's kind of the cult activity that I had in mind.
Yeah, I like that. Did you envision that that cannibal cult being responsible in any way for the disappearing kids in the Dankworth cave?
Well, this actually is an interesting thing. They very well have been, right?
Mm.
But the cults I envision do work against one another. They're all aware of each other, but they do agree, for example, that even though they have to use the Dankworth Hole for rituals,
mm-hmm.
It's the best place in town. I don't know if they've mapped the ley lines or it just seems like the best place, but they have to use it for rituals, but they can't constantly use it for sacrifices because it will bring too much attention to the town.
Yeah, naturally.
So I have this is a good question, Aaron, because to me, this kind of flows into these two kind of related problems that the town has. And by town, I mean these cults. The town has a lot of problems that are probably quite difficult to solve. But the cults themselves have the problem of there being not enough blood. So there are only so many people that you can ritually murder in a small town, including tourists, without arousing suspicion.
And it's harder when there's less tourists too.
And it's harder when there's less tourists. And blood is absolutely vital, kind of, to these secret societies. So there's always competition for new sacrifices. And when one cult has performed a ritual with a sacrifice, then by sort of agreement and out of pragmatism, the others must also refrain from pursuing their own goals in this particular way for some undefined period of time.
Right. So there is a definite possibility that a tourist could be marked out for sacrifice by the cults, and they're all competing to try and do some sort of terrible ritual to them.
Yeah, absolutely. The second problem is the problem of the decaying town, because Grey Thursday and then this string of other unlucky events left the town fairly static. So there's, like you said before, there's no really new shops or developments materializing for a very long time, because there's sort of no new investment coming in. So the population is aging, which is a problem for most developed societies, but it's an extra problem. It's an extra problem here because the young people are leaving, and it's a problem for those cults who congregate there, because of course you need to recruit and expand. And even if you think the rapture is coming next week, you have to plan on what to do if it doesn't.
Yes.
There's that kind of context there.
And if your rituals involve eating the young, then you've got fewer and fewer. And on top of that, you're now sort of with fewer tourists. You're now stuck eating, well, in a town of 600 people, your cousin's cousin.
Your cousin's cousin, yeah, which is a problem, I would say.
Mm.
I also have 2 residents that I think are interesting. So the first resident is Betty Holt, the mayor's wife. Barry Holt's wife is named Betty Holt. So she is actually, in my mind, I see her as a kind of high-ranking member of the cannibal cult, the Groft House of Murvock. Her husband knows about this. He's not a cult member. He disapproves and tries to kind of ignore it. Sometimes, like early on in their relationship, he even tried to talk her into adopting a healthier lifestyle. But, she in turn loves him back in her own way. And she will definitely 100% regret having to eliminate him after it's time for her to consume the flesh of her own son when he reaches his 15th birthday. Which is... in my head, it's like if you're starting a game in this sort of thing, this is just like a couple months away. So she's been meditating a lot lately, and she's haunted by dreams and visions of her incredible, perfect god made of corpses. And the second resident is Trevor Jennings Lee, or Old Trev. And he's kind of a common sight on the streets of Yaranga, and has been since the 80s. He prefers to be called a vagrant rather than a hobo or unhoused individual.
Right.
He's not part of the cult community in town, but he is well aware of it. He used to be a computer programmer, so he did some work for the mining company when it first rolled into town. But over time, he began seeing sort of strange premonitions in the databases that he was constructing. He was looking at all this stuff, and he was sure that he has found some kind of algorithm to predict the future. And he's seen something so disturbing that he had a mental breakdown and basically just started living on the street. So this one I'm leaving a little bit open-ended because I feel like this could be an interesting character to run into, and then either give him useful information that he can bestow upon players, or possibly be a red herring. Maybe he is just a man with mental health issues. We know these people, unfortunately, are not very well looked after in our society, or most societies.
Yes, it's sadly true.
That's it. That's pretty much great. It for me.
I've got a bunch of notes, and I'm excited to battle you in World War words over them.
Oh, I love that.
Time for World War words.
We are back.
We are back. Do you want to go first, or shall I go first?
Well, I went first last time.
Oh, you did. All right. Let me go first. Okay. Couple things here. Number one, the prayer slides. I love this idea. I think this is a fantastic element in the setting. It's sort of this idea that I've played with in some of the fiction that I write. Things that are sort of magical shapes, and then they do something. I think that's a very good idea. And
I'll confess. The idea is ripped straight out of Good Omens and Crowley adjusting the lines for the highway that goes around London so that it creates the sigil Odegra, which is all hail Satan, the great beast, or something.
Yeah, I think it's actually I think it happens in a few stories. I just think it's a good idea. I think it sounds good, right? It sounds good. So, look, in my opinion, I think the prayer slides actually serve this great purpose, and that's keeping Mrs. Wattle alive. Yeah, so I thought I'd link it to that a little bit. So each time that some of that life force leaves a person, It sort of travels down the slide, down these sigils, then into the pool and through pipes and into her crumbling home. That's a houseboat behind the park.
Yep.
I've got this idea that no one has seen her for many years, actually. And like, if they saw her now, they would be filled with such a great disgust. So I have this picture in my head. And almost when you started talking about the prayer slides, this came right into my mind's eye. So this kind of picture of Mrs. Wattle wallowing in this kind of indoor pool that she has there. Her body is kind of grown corpulent over time. And she's kind of like this, almost like a Jabba the Hutt kind of character squeezed into a pool that's too small for it. Sort of like mounds of her kind of spilling over the sides.
Yep.
But she's alive, which is for her the most important part. Like, she sits there kind of in the waters of her own filth, and she's nourished by this very, very trickling flow of essence. But the process has taken too long. It's taken too long for her. So she's spent so much money keeping the town alive, and yet she's still here. She's stuck in the corporeal world. So had Grey Thursday never occurred, and had the cults not kind of meddled in the town's affairs and all that string of bad luck for the town, if it hadn't happened, she thinks that she would be a goddess right now.
Yep.
And the reason why she thinks that is kind of rooted in her past. So she used to travel extensively with her husband, Morton. And a long time ago, she found an ancient scroll at a market in Marrakesh, which caught her eye. And there were lots of pictures in it. And the pictures had these beautiful bodies ascending to heaven, that kind of thing. And she became very obsessed with it. There was a lot of foreign writing on it, which she could never, in the time that she did spend looking at it, she could never get anyone to translate or identify the script. And over time, she actually learned to read the words in her dreams, which became more and more disturbing over time. Right. She became very obsessed with this idea of aging. Like, in her 30s, she became very disgusted by that idea.
I would suggest then that young Mrs. Wattle was considered like a great beauty.
Yeah, I think so. And this isn't something, I have a feeling, like in my head anyway, I have a feeling that this isn't something that was, like, this notion was not natural to her to sort of hate herself in that way, but it sort of like wormed its way into her mind over time.
The understanding the script in any way, shape or form causes you to feel that way.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's, I don't want that to sort of trivialize the real life things of like body dysmorphia or dysphoria or any of those things, but just the idea of coming to a gradual awareness and you're not quite sure where it's from, that you don't like yourself on some fundamental level. I think that interests me.
And this desire of apotheosis at any cost is very, very Cthulhu-esque.
Yeah. And, you know, when she first started, so she helped her husband build this park, and she had some very specific designs for it, because it's not just the slides either, right? Like, I think every part of this park is kind of an esoteric message to forces which lie beyond darkness of space and time, you know? Like, it's some kind of message, it's some kind of spell and enchantment and incantation that just works that way. And when she first started, when Wattle's Water World was popular at its height, she felt better and better. She felt amazing. Her skin was smoother in her mind's eye anyway, like by her reckoning. You know, her hair was more lustrous. But then after Grey Thursday, things changed. The ritual in itself has a corrupting kind of element to it. The energy that you would need to maintain it would exponentially grow, like those energy needs.
Yep.
When it kind of like went down to a trickle, then all that corruption caught up with her in a physical way. And now she's no longer like obsessed with beauty or anything like that in general. Now she's just become very obsessed with enduring the next day and the next day and the next day.
Yeah, I'm twist on that.
Yeah.
I would say that the water world is all laid out, and each different section of the theme park is meant to do something else for her, in the sense that if it sort of all together, if it's all working properly, was supposed to make her a living goddess.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's great.
So the slides give her immortality, the merry-go-round gives her, supposed to give her control over people's minds and, other little bits and pieces like that. And at its height, that was working. But I love your notion that, yes, it reached sort of a high point and it failed. It just wasn't. It built up to a point and has now sort of collapsed. And now there's just that trickle left.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I like that very much. Yeah.
So, yes, Mrs. Bottle is a failed goddess, one who reached
failed
the
goddess,
cusp of it,
yeah.
and it's just this disgusting thing trapped in a tub. I would say, because of some of my ideas, that she's still a major influence in the town. In her tub, she's got laptops and things, and communicates with and moves her. Still reasonable resources around and communicates.
I think she'd definitely have minions.
Yeah. Perhaps also that's one of the other things in the theme park that still works, or at least perhaps once it did, and these now aging minions are all that's left.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Like an old Renfield.
Yeah, like some people who went into the House of Mirrors came out changed. Only, 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000, but when they came out, she now has their soul and she commands them. So
yeah, that's good. That's good. I like that.
Yeah,
I think that comes together quite well. Yeah,
but somebody's broken the mirrors, or at least just enough of them, so that the ritual no longer works. So if anybody does go through it and she's no longer in a place where she's capable of getting it repaired properly.
Love it. Makes sense to me.
So I wanted to talk about the cults and just to flesh them out, sort of like you've done with the prayer slides, which I adore, by the way.
Thank you.
So just a small piece first. The reason why the Dankworth Cave is sort of a place of worship for all three of these cults. A fair way into the cave, part that's regularly flooded, after the earthquake that caused the tower to appear, one of the walls is now that white, strange stone that makes up the tower. And so each of the three cults go to this specific cave in this specific place. And this wall, the prophets all three of them have something to do with the tower, so all of them go to the tower, because each of them believe that this wall is the base of the tower.
Yeah. I like that.
Cool. So, prophets of the tower. I want to contend that the leader of the prophets, perhaps the prophet himself, or maybe they are all prophets, is the leader of them is the director of the local mining company. Since, the goal of the prophets of the tower is around this second coming of the second child of God, they want to release it from the tower, and the mining company is actually spending money and researching ways of trying to break open the tower to give birth to the second child of God.
Brilliant. Okay. I mean, it's a rock, right? Like, you can mine a rock.
Exactly. The trouble is this strange white stone doesn't mine normally. Basic tools doesn't work. Electric tools stop functioning. There's something that stops anybody from just busting it open. What the prophets may or may not know, I'd like to talk to you about it, is that if anybody does manage to bust open the tower or even destroy the tower entirely, that the earthquake that forced it would continue in such a way to destroy the entire town.
Fascinating. So the tower itself is like they put a pin in it. They put a pin in the earthquake.
Yep.
Yes.
Cool.
That's great. Yeah. I like that, because then that's something that you can, in a gaming sense, this kind of information can be sort of trickled out to the players, and then they can come to the hilarious decision to destroy the tower and the town, which I feel like most players I know would go for.
I mean, it would do the great thing of definitely stopping all three of the cults from doing their gig for some time, potentially forever.
For sure, yeah.
It's
a solution to this problem. The problem of this town existing.
So yes, okay. That's I've got ideas for the others. But I thought I'd hand back to you.
I like that very much. Yeah, cool. I don't have anything else to say about that, except I think that works, and that idea of we believe this is one thing, but this is actually another thing. I think works quite well in Cthulhu and in that kind of cosmic fiction, because it's sort of a lot of that stuff is very symbolic and it's not literal, and what you think is one thing might be another thing because you don't possess the foundational knowledge to understand it.
There's also just the the idea of like there are no good solutions to a
There
problem.
are no good solutions, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
What's next on your list?
This is one I really like, the Yaranga ruse. So this is next on my list. So in my head, I was thinking I really like this football club that you've created, and that it can be a repository for knowledge and stories from the past. But I wanted to sort of take it just a step further, and I wanted to have this idea that actually, unbeknownst to the cults in Yaranga, the ruse themselves actually represent a fourth secret fellowship, a secret power in the town. And I'll tell you about this a little now.
Yeah.
So my idea was that like all players, after being initiated, become informed about the cult activity and kind of the secret history of the town. The Yaranga ruse are a secret society that seeks to actually save the town from the cults. And it's partly why they're not very good at football. Because their priorities are quite apart from winning games. They're more concerned with winning the secret war that is being fought on the streets and beaches of Yaranga.
Right.
I had this idea that they may have evolved from maybe like a Victorian era secret society, being the reason, a stupid reason, but a reason for why they do not, as a rule, allow women in the club. So like, the idea here was like the players in the club are usually fit young men. Physical development is encouraged by the rules that they follow, because saving people is hard work, they believe, and cannot be achieved without putting on some muscle. But they face the same problem, the same fundamental problem as the cults, is that the dying town and an aging population. So I thought the problem for them could be that in the next couple years, it's quite possible that they would have to become delisted from the local leagues.
Yes.
And they don't have a working plan for this, except to get better at football and encourage like the idea of maybe importing some players from the towns in the area. And I thought this could be a sort of a gameable thing as well, where like you maybe help the club become better at football to save the town.
You can have a Disney sports film in the middle of your Cthulhu adventure.
Yeah.
With a bunch of misogynist anti-cultists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be like an interesting sort of contrast to the kind of like complete grim idea of these cults doing whatever it is that cults do.
Yeah, no, but I like it that they've got no god. There's nothing occult about them. Their whole stance is anti-occult, right?
Anti-occult, yeah. And I have another link there actually. So I really enjoyed the top end souvenirs. This whole idea of your sin cellar. So I thought a good link there would be that, last year wanting to motivate the team, the coach, Ben Boplin, bought a very harmless looking motivational poster from Top End Souvenirs.
Yep.
It was Yaranga themed. And it's one of those kind of hang in there, kitty, success is a mountain you must climb type deals.
Yep.
And as you may have guessed, the frame contains Hendrik Peterzoon's bone shard in it. And then from there, things could get interesting.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's I as soon as you said that, my thought was it's exactly the hang in there cat poster, except it's a kangaroo.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, it's a kangaroo and it's trying to climb over was that a clothesline or something?
I can't remember. Whatever, but it is just absolutely a complete rip-off. It's just a kangaroo.
Yeah. That was my second idea.
No, I love that. 100% full marks. Yeah, no, I think the crucial part to me is the like anti-occultness. I do like this sort of Victorian origin of Victorian sort of gentleman. I sort of want to say something like they came to Yaranga because, they hear the strange things about Spilt Milk Cove, and they do discover that the nascent cults are starting to form. They stay around, but they start to die out, so they attach themselves to the football club. That gives them their new members. It starts this whole tradition. And
that works, yeah. It kind of slides together.
It also works really well with when Mrs. Bottle comes in and swoops in and saves the club from its first death in the 70s and revamps the place. I mean, I said that it was because that they're a bunch of misogynists that they offend her and so she turns against them. But in fact, they learn that she is also an occult force of what they would consider evil, and I think most people would.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, so yes, they've now not just battling 3 cults, which apparently they've been doing for, better on 2 centuries and not succeeded. But now they've got a 4th front.
Yeah, I think also if you have I think you can sell this idea if you have a good enough GM that having 3 cults in a small town, that's a lot of cults.
Yeah.
And keeping everything secret, I think, speaks to either a level of competence with the cults or simply a level of incompetence with everyone else.
I'm happy with a little column A, column B, but I definitely like the idea that they're relatively competent. I also just have this notion that they're not very big. There's no more than somewhere between 12 and 20 members in each of the cults.
Definitely. Yeah. That works for me, for sure. Yeah, it wouldn't be like spanning every second person in this town is a cult member. It just wouldn't quite work.
No. They need a normal populace to swim within and to recruit from. All right, well, speaking of the cults, so yeah, I've got a couple of ideas around the Temple Unwavering and the Groff Tolls of Murvoc, and to tie them in with the weird stuff on the Cove. So,
okay,
bear with me, I've got a bit of stuff here to sort of weave together.
Yeah, let's do it.
The Temple Unwavering, which were the guys and gals seeking to free themselves from their corporeal form, following the map and become these beings of light.
I'd like that too. That would be incredible.
I mean, so long as I can still have my books, that sounds good. I mean, there's a lot of
But your books would be books of pure light.
All right, yep. Chocolates of pure light? Can I have chocolate of pure light?
It'd be everything would be pure light.
Yeah,
even the darkness, pure light.
I'm on board.
Yeah. Well, it's nighttime. Oh God, it's so bright.
My thinking with the Temple of Wavering is that after Grey Thursday in 1989, they're doing their thing now in Dankworth Cave, and a being of light comes to them.
Makes sense.
They believe that it is Melanie Dankworth who didn't die in the cave. She actually ascended to become a being of light.
Interesting. Ooh, I like this connection. Okay.
And that this being is able to communicate with them poorly, through, empathic connections, and only when they sacrifice blood to it, all that sort of fun and exciting stuff. They believe that she's now their guide to unlocking the last bit of the map.
Oh, fantastic.
This is not really the case, but I'm just going to put that pin in that for a second whilst I talk about.
Yeah, I figured this wouldn't be an easy sort of thing. Oh wow, this is how we do it? That's so easy.
Oh, yeah, cool, neat. We just follow the instructions and everyone gets to be, or at least we get to be beings of light, and everyone else can get fucked. Groff Tiles and Murvoc, our child cannibals. Our
child cannibals,
children. Yeah. That's one of those awkward terms anyway.
Child cannibals, yeah.
Yeah.
Not very popular these days, but...
Well, you mentioned that their initiation ritual, when they learn their language in their own idiosyncratic way, is they're starved and then they're released out to the forest, and that's where they learn it.
The bush, Aaron. The bush.
Sorry, the bush. Yes.
The forest. Oh my God.
I am a proper Australian. Not just the bush. They're released onto Big Bluff.
Okay.
And there, on Big Bluff, they are in their delirious, starved state. They're able to be contacted by the psychic entity that is trapped there atop Big Bluff. This entity, which from here on I'm just going to call Murvoc. So Murvoc is a utterly insubstantial, non-corporeal thing of air and light, but it longs to consume and to experience and to have sensual delight, which is to say, delight in the senses, although, a little bit of the other kind of sensual as well.
Absolutely.
Currently it only subsists on the psychic scraps that it gets from these vibrant teenage emotions as they canoodle and drink and laugh and party and stuff.
Canoodle. I don't think anyone has ever said that word on a podcast before.
Well, I'm delighted to be the first.
Pioneer.
I am. So it's this Murvoc entity that's the sort of guiding force. The thing is, it's utterly inhuman and completely insane, which is why everyone learns that language differently. What it desperately wants is a body to truly experience food and sex and partying and all that fun stuff. But it's communicated this so poorly to its followers that they believe it has this strange put-together body.
Ah, okay, yeah.
But since the tower's creation, maybe the tower acts sort of like a psychic antenna, and now it's able to get a bit through a little bit better, and its followers are now creating from the bones of their victims an avatar for it.
All right.
Now, the missing teenagers that I talked about on Big Bluff,
Yes.
the secret behind that is that Murvok will pick one that's particularly vibrant in emotion, one that it truly wants to experience things like it. And they, as I say, they become distracted and distant. And they are marked by the Murvok. And the Groftiles will eventually kidnap them from Big Bluff, drag them down into Dankworth Hole, and consume them as a favoured sacrifice.
Ah.
Their bones that are being used to create an avatar.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. That's a really good link there, and linking those two cults together as well.
Here's the real link that I want to do. The Murvok and the Ghost of Dankworth that isn't really the Ghost of Dankworth. The Ghost of Dankworth is something that was birthed from Grey Thursday in 1989.
Okay.
When Mrs. Wattle's ritual sort of reached a peak and then sort of fizzled out, some of that energy went into creating a ghost of a goddess.
Ah. Kind of like the foundations for a soul or an entity that she could ascend to or something.
Sort of like an embryonic god, an embryonic divinity.
Yes. Great.
The thing is, it didn't reach its divinity, and it's essentially stillborn, and the only thing it wants is to not exist.
Ah.
It is the diametric opposite of Murvok, and stuck in this Dankworth cave beneath Big Bluff, and the two non-corporeal entities loathe each other.
That's very interesting. I like that. Yeah. At first, when you were saying this, I thought that the direction you were going to go would be that they're the same thing.
Right.
But that's very interesting. I like.
Because the Murvok is this thing of air and desire, and the Dankworth thing is of darkness and wants oblivion.
Yes.
But being non-corporeal, they can't do anything to one another, so they're trying to sort of act their cult. So one of the things you mentioned about Betty Holt was that she's, proud member of the Groftiles of Murvok.
Yep.
And that she's preparing to consume her own son. This is because her own son is beginning to hear the Murvok. He's the next favoured sacrifice.
Ah, okay.
But
all right, yeah.
The Templars have learned that Betty's son is the next favoured sacrifice, and they are being pushed by the Dankworth entity to interrupt their ritual, to perhaps take the son as a sacrifice before the Groftiles of Murvok do.
Okay. Yeah, that really worked. And by Templars, you mean the adherents of
the Temple Unwavering.
Temple Unwavering.
Yes. Sorry, I've just been calling them Templars because it sort of works.
It works. It works.
And I thought perhaps they managed to learn of this because they used the Hippocrast.
Yeah. That works for me. I love that. That's fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
This is interesting, right? Because this is the first time actually that something that you mentioned runs into a contradiction of something I was going to mention.
Okay.
But so this is, but I feel like yours is better in this one. So my idea for one of the problems in the Big Bluff in general, Big Bluff, is this place like it's very mysterious. It's the kind of place that people would assume has a lot of, cult activity, the things which happen there linked to like murders or sacrifices or something else, that kind of thing, right? But in my mind, I had this idea that Big Bluff would just be a red herring. Like it would be nothing. It would be the stories about it and all this lore about kids that go missing and become withdrawn is just not. It is just stories that it would just be a very mundane place and nothing supernatural about it at all.
Oh man, I love that because I'm going to guess you came to this idea because it is just a big bluff.
Yeah,
it's a great idea, man. It really is.
What I was thinking. But I think I'll withdraw that one. I think from the running of this setting because I genuinely do think that yours is also a really good idea. I think it's certainly more fleshed out than this is nothing.
I don't know. I definitely, when we do the material packet for this, I definitely want to take that idea in a little call out box and say, look, it's entirely possible that the cults around Big Bluff and beneath it in Dankworth Hole are nothing. Like there's no real entities. It is all just a big bluff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
See, I have this feeling that it could be in an. You know how books have gameable books very often have like here's the setting, here's the ideas, here's a bunch of optional things. So it could definitely be a gaming suggestion.
Yeah, because I do like it, and it does take the name of the location and make it really, really funny. The GM can just look at it and go, I told you it was a big bluff.
It's a big bluff. Yeah.
And then presumably
as soon as I heard it, I was like, yeah.
I mean, you'd want to be a fast on your feet GM at that point.
You would, yeah. That's actually, you know what? That's actually all that I managed to get out. Have you got more?
I do. Not a lot more.
You go.
Just a couple of small pieces.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of Old Trev, because again, in any setting, you want characters who know things so that you can get information. And the idea of this programmer who learned dreadful secrets through his algorithm and his database that drove him mad, adore it.
Mm-hmm.
And what it told to me is I wanted to expand a little bit, that he's not entirely homeless, that he does have somewhere, and I love your input on this, some sort of hidden place where he's networked together a stack of like old PCs and mobile phones and laptops and bits and pieces, and all of them are running his predictive algorithm on a database. So when he's going around the streets, he's scrounging for more parts for his, and you like this, his predictive index difference engine, or his pride.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
I need this for my pride. And he's also, of course, also seeking more information to put into his predictive algorithm and his database, information into the database for the predictive algorithm to act upon. And that can be a story element where, you'll be able to learn how something will go, because if you get this secret information to old Trev, then he'll put it into his weird difference engine thing and give you the information, like destroying the tower would destroy the town, that sort of fun stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I see that. As for a place that he could be in, I've got one idea.
Yeah.
Which would be perhaps he's hiding in the water world somewhere.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Like I'm not super familiar with water parks, to be honest.
Well,
I've been down water
plus
slides.
Water park, so
a theme park plus water park. Yeah, not everything has to be water in there, I suppose. There's you can go for the classic. Perhaps he's hanging out in a haunted mansion.
Yeah.
And sometimes he gets out, he scares people that are walking through, or maybe he just lives there. He's just like at the center of it somewhere, maybe like an old storage room or something, cut off from everywhere else.
Yeah.
But he's got to be careful because Mrs. Wattle's minions are always watching.
Always. The only reason he can get in and out is because he's finagled the security system and because the theme park doesn't have many people going in it anymore.
Yeah.
Yep.
That seems fair to me.
And I like that. It also means going into the lair of one of the big evils to get the real information from old Trev. When you're right,
definitely.
In the street, but he can't really do anything for you there. He's got to meet him at his lair.
Yeah, you have to, and maybe perhaps like finding your way there, like working out. Perhaps he doesn't want to share that knowledge with you.
Yeah,
perhaps he's keeping it for himself. He doesn't trust you, so you have to, kind of
get him in his lair.
That's it.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I did have one little piece because you finished your fable fodder with the twin problems of the dying town, and I sort of wanted to tie a few things together with that. So we established that Barry Holt is trying to get in a bunch of investors in the sort of opening prologue. Betty, who's a big part of the Groff Tiles of Murdoch cult, his wife, is actually the one that's really behind that. She's been pushing her husband to go out there and get some new investors to breathe life back into town because she wants her cult to succeed, and that means they need new tourists.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I mentioned in a couple of my work the Yaranga Business Association. Hendrick's in it. I would also presume that that Barry Holt would be part of it. There's a mayor of the town. Another member of it would be the managing director of the mining company, who's part of the Temple Unwavering.
Right. Has he got a name?
I'm just calling him the Prophet at the moment, but yeah, let's give him a name.
Yeah.
Let's give him a name.
Daniel.
Yeah, all right. What's a good Aussie mining director surname?
Gallagher.
I like Gallagher. Daniel Gallagher. He's also on the Business Association, and he's also supporting Barry Holt's attempts to get new investors in, even though he's from not just a different cult. He's from, these are two cults that don't like each other because they're weird entities that the half of them hate each other, but they both want the new investors to come in, so they've sort of got this tense alliance thing going on.
Yeah, that's great.
But Mrs. Wattle, who's the unofficial leader of the Business Association, she's got the most influence and still the sort of most funds, is pushing back because for all that she could do with more people in the theme park, she's in that precarious position of just wanting to stay static and stagnant.
Yeah, maintain the status quo.
Yeah.
This way, nothing unpredictable can sort of happen and throw off her own agenda.
Yes, which at the moment is just continuing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Cool.
Oh, I love that.
I don't know if we did much warring there, honestly.
I don't think we did a lot of warring there, no. But then I feel like these ideas kind of slid together quite well.
They did.
Oh, hello. I didn't notice you standing there. I was just polishing my microphone. I'm doing the audio editing for this pilot episode of Mythtakes Were Made, so if there are any awful sounds making their way into your ear holes, that's my fault. I am putting those sounds there, inside your holes. As you can imagine, we are still working out the kinks in this show, not the sexy kind, and so the format and the way we approach things may change as we move forward. This next section is called Jumping to Conclusions. Here is the voice of the child I paid in applesauce to say the thing.
Oh, now we're jumping to conclusions.
Thank you, child. Anyway, in the next section, we will introduce ourselves to you and ask one another some questions related to this pilot episode. I hope that you have enjoyed every bit of this as much, if not more, than we have enjoyed recording it. See you soon for more terrible myth takes. Here we go.
I'm Aaron Bragan, and I have loved stories for as long as I can remember, whether that was novels, films, television, or my grandfather telling tales. They inspired in me the belief that humans live for family, art, and discovery, and I discovered tabletop RPGs 24 years ago and started running them for friends and family only a few years later. Today, I am a professional game master here in Adelaide, South Australia, and utterly thrilled to be collaborating with my old friend Chris.
I'm Chris, and you vultures are not getting my surname out of me. I work as a special educator in the great state of Victoria. I am a writer, currently brewing up some short stories to send out to fiction magazines. If you have ever played the role-playing game Barbarians of Lemuria, know that the entire setting of the North was written by me, and the locations of that part of the game were also devised by my brain. I am and have always been a great fan of science fiction, fantasy, and horror as genres, but I'm also fascinated by history, linguistics, and other real-world things that sound smart and make me sound smart. I was born in Poland, canonically, according to the greatest book in the world, the Bible, the greatest country in the world, before migrating to Australia as a child, which Australia also is fine. I hope we can all get to know one another through the work that we do and the dreams that we weave. This is the pilot episode of our brand new podcast called Mythtakes Were Made. We are making this podcast, which is a world-building podcast.
We're going to go through the process of creating a whole setting. Characters, places, problems, magical artifacts.
To start off with, we have devised this pilot episode sort of as a way to showcase what the podcast will be about. We envision the podcast over 12 episodes, dealing mostly with a fantasy theme. For this pilot episode, we have envisioned a self-contained setting.
A cosmic horror genre set in an Australian town on the north coast of Queensland. As Chris says, a small self-contained setting for people to use in Call of Cthulhu games and similar.
And I think the idea is that our settings and our ideas can broadly be used in a lot of contexts. Role-playing is sort of the realm that we are looking at and where we are coming from. But the main concept for this is to sort of take a look behind the curtains of setting development. How do people come up with settings in a collaborative fashion for use in role-playing games or similar? Something that's always interested me is the creative process, and I always felt that this is a niche that has not been explored in podcast form yet, and that's why we are doing this.
Because the structure that we're using is somewhat artificial for our podcast with our fable fodder and then war of words, but the understanding underlying ideas of what kinds of places, what kind of people, what kind of problems that you're going to want to make for your own setting are still fundamentally the same. And we're sort of hoping that by going through it with us, you'll gain a deeper understanding of those fundamental principles and are hopefully inspired when it comes to doing your own.
But what makes us qualified to explore this in the first place? I suppose the idea is that we are both creative people and we have spent a lot of time delving into fiction, using fiction in games, in writing.
Not to mention also being great fans of existing settings across a wide variety. I think it'd be fair to say that between us, we have read a phenomenal number of books.
I think so. So, Aaron, something that I want to know is when you were coming up with your part of Fable Fodder, bringing this setting to life, what was your guiding principle in this episode?
It's the same guiding principles that I use when I'm writing for the games that I run, which is that you want to have both problems and solutions and carefully not matching them. You don't want to have problems and solutions like jigsaw pieces because that is running headlong into railroading players, or the very minimum in a sort of more fictional context, telegraphing a little too much about what is going to fix the conflict of the story.
Mm-hmm.
The other major principle is that every solution should have an inbuilt problem. That's where your grit, your friction, and your conflict comes from. But problems can also be solutions. So just to be a bit more specific, the Hippocrast allows you to discover any secret. Amazing. Solution to all sorts of problems, especially in mystery games and cosmic horror games. And it does come with a problem of revealing or potentially creating secrets of your own. Whereas problems being also solutions, the three cults that you've got, plus the Mrs. Wattle situation, there's the business council with these different power blocks within it. But nobody's a good guy on that business council. Like, we've got multiple cults, we've got the sin seller, but they can be turned against one another, potentially turning problems into solutions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds like a really good way of bringing something like this to life.
Yeah, I thought so. So it's funny you asked me that question because, you see, I have the exact same question for you, Chris.
Wow, what an amazing coincidence.
Totally.
I guess for me, one of my first instincts here, which I believe goes kind of against every single mental imperative in my body and mind, is to make sure that the setting doesn't get too silly or that it doesn't start off being too silly. Like, as you well know, I would like any of the listeners also to know this. I am probably a very frustrating player to have in a game. Is that true? Would you say that?
I would say that you add challenge to a game that I relish and does occasionally inspire frustration, yes.
The reason for that is not just because I'm an asshole, but I think my job in education is fairly serious and frustrating to me on a great many levels. And so I hate sort of experiencing those feelings in a game. So I see role-playing as kind of a silly escape from that. So when I create characters and scenarios, they tend to not be very serious, or they challenge the kind of straightforwardness of the setting or the situation and annoy the GM. But with the Yaranga, I wanted to sort of make sure that I don't wade too far into those waters. The purpose of the pilot especially is to show sort of the collaborative nature of the world building process. So, and while I know that in our longer format, the 12 episode season that we have coming up, I think we probably will have some opportunities to get a little bit frivolous. It's not the right fit for something that's such a limited run as a setting, except for the Groff Tales of Murvoc. I made them because I wanted to have sort of one thing that sounded like bad 60s or 70s fantasy in it.
Well, and in your defense, the bad 60s science fiction does fit neatly into a cosmic horror Call of Cthulhu setting.
Yeah, I think it can. And especially, I think there are, to any setting, I think there are multiple layers. And obviously, I think people gravitate towards different settings and different games and different genres for different reasons. They make them feel specific types of feelings.
And within a genre, it's not a bad idea to have different tones in different areas. My first thought was going to X-Files, where you had some very serious and very scary stuff, and you still had whole episodes that were as goofy as hell. That didn't stop X-Files, the show, from being a largely scary, serious show.
Yeah, absolutely. And that contrast of, I think, things being lighthearted and silly and also being being quite grim and serious can be an important one, I believe, for sort of showing, well, this setting is like the world. Not everything in the world is terrible, but not everything in the world is happy either. We have lots of angles in our society.
And it is easy to see the shadows when you've got some light.
Wow, that's very quotable.
Thank you.
Yeah. I do have another question for you.
Yes?
Which part of this process surprised you the most?
I suspect we may have similar answers in this. That's just my guess. The part that surprised me the most was just how, even when we got to World War words and we were ostensibly challenging one another, every time you challenged me with my ideas, I just felt like you were expanding on them and growing them, twisting them to reveal more interesting highlights. When I challenged you, it seemed this a very similar experience. I'm curious, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. Like, from the get-go, there was this sort of interesting interaction between our ideas. I was very surprised that they came together as smoothly as they did. I think a lot of this probably has to do with the fact that we have been friends for a very long time, and I think we have a fairly good grasp of one another's creative processes, or maybe creative output. Like, for example, I feel like you tend to be someone who enjoys that kind of high fantasy, high magic kind of thing.
Guilty as charged.
I thought that might be reflected in your descriptions, and I think it was, because it's fair to say that you managed to weave quite a bit of magic into the setting. Whereas, like, I generally keep things a little more ambiguous and low to the ground. So, but the way that these two approaches worked together is because you went high, I went low.
Yeah.
The ideas worked together because it's like neither of us went overboard either with our particular interests, right? You didn't go too magical. I didn't go too grimdark. Yeah.
Or silly. So yes,
silly. Yeah.
We were deliberately aiming for the middle. So perhaps as the show progresses and we have the opportunities to indulge our own specialities, perhaps we might find some more areas to war in.
Definitely. I think there's space for this kind of thing later. So in our fantasy setting, for the first season of Mythtakes were made, I think we probably will see a lot more contrasting concepts. We'll probably branch out to, out of the familiar and into the more sort of fantastical. Whereas here it's a lot easier because it is a, modern-ish real-world setting. I think it's a lot easier to sort of keep that on a certain level.
On a similar plane, agreed.
That's right, yeah.
Well, I've got a question for you this time. So if we were to take Yaranga and what we've already worked out, and if we were going to do a whole season around Yaranga, what would you explore further?
That is a good question. And I've thought about it a little bit, because I definitely came away from our initial recording with this idea of, that's actually something that I would like to explore more, or like I would like to live a life in this world. I'd like to play a game in this world. I'd like to do something else creative in this world, perhaps, which is great. I think that's probably what we're looking for. Look, I think for me, I would probably work on like the horror cosmology of the whole place. For me, one of the best parts of the Lovecraftian kind of horror is this idea that, H.P. Lovecraft, much like his namesake H.P. Source, was afraid of a lot of things. He was afraid of social change. It was afraid of anyone different from him, and his writing kind of shows that. Like, he really liked lists of cool equipment, but then he was terrified of anyone that he perceived as fundamentally different to him. So for him, what that created was an existential terror. And so the universes that he created represented a kind of like a very chaotic anti-human state, where all threats were therefore existential in nature, because you could not possibly predict what these elder entities and creatures would do or what they wanted. You were nothing to them. So even this idea that, like, in Yaranga, these cults are doing things, they couch these gods or monsters in the language of religion, but that's largely irrelevant to the creatures themselves. Like, their goals are alien, their lives are alien, their agendas are alien, sometimes maybe even contradictory. Like, I'd like to explore that idea that this all kind of does fit into the physical universe, right? Just because we're too small to understand it doesn't mean there's no order to it. I'd like to explore on some level how it all works and how it all fits together, not from the perspective of the people who are living in it, more from the perspective of us, the literal gods of this setting. If that makes sense?
It does. I do.
Yeah.
A somewhat meta narrative to go along with an on-the-table narrative.
Yeah, exactly. When you look at a game book, for example, and it tells you, well, this is how the universe is. However, people living in it don't know that. This is what they know, or may think they know. I think that just creates a really interesting energy between the setting and the player.
The truth in the fiction and the fiction in the fiction.
That's right, yeah. I was going to turn the tables on you and ask you the same question.
I think when we completed our War of the Worlds section and I was contemplating on it, the GM, Game Mastery part of me, really wanted to play around with the failed apotheosis of Mrs. Wattle and the various ritualized spells that are reified in the theme park rides. Partially just because I loved the idea of, I suppose, these discrete theme park elements that give supernatural abilities just from a purely game level, mechanic level, that felt like something really fun, that had these built-in solutions of problems and problems of solutions mechanic that I like when I'm running games.
Mm-hmm.
But I also, the overall narrative would be around temptation. Mrs. Wattle does genuinely hold the keys to living godhood. If you do perfect, or at least theoretically, if you perfect what the scroll from Marrakesh says, that you have the potential to become a living god. She rose high but didn't quite reach it. And so a game where the players are in opposition with Mrs. Wattle and the other forces, but constantly tempted to walk the same path that she has, given that I'm running a sort of cosmic horror Cthulhu-esque kind of game, that would never end well.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, I think that also is a very compelling aspect that we could expand upon. And with that, we're done. I think we're done. Are we done? We're done. Thank you for listening.
If this is the first time you're hearing us, I suggest you go look for our podcast online. We'll be starting Season 1 very soon, and possibly it's already out. If you've already listened to Season 1, I hope you enjoyed this. And for those of you who have particularly enjoyed our setting, please check the description box below for a link to a completely free document with everything that we've discussed in this episode, all written out with some pretty pictures for you to enjoy and use in your own games and stories.